probably a good time to bring you in because, of course, what's happening with cities or the policies for the future development of cities is not simply being created by the people who live in those cities. Much bigger powers are at work. What have you got for us?
We've talked about global and smart cities. They're trying to elevate cities' authority well beyond what they're actually authorized to do. And that manifests itself in many ways. Now, what we have here, this is actually a few years old, about 2019, 2020. But as we know, with the establishment, things are put on the stove and they simmer for a long time. And this report is called The Future of Urban Consumption in a 1.5 Celsius degree world. Under C40 cities. The C40 cities is a grouping of cities dedicated to combating climate change. And here on the foreword to this report, a rather lengthy report that I went through, it says in the upper right there, cities drive the global economy and urban decisions have impact well beyond city boundaries. And there's more meaning to that than you think. This is put together not only by C40, but also Arup and the University of Leeds. And I'm showing that here, University Leeds, Arup, which I'll describe in a moment, and C40 cities. This report by C40, Arup, and the University of Leeds assesses the impact of urban consumption, very important here, urban consumption on climate breakdown, and explores the type and scale of changes needed to ensure that C40 cities reduce their GHG emissions in line with internationally agreed climate-safe limits. And we'll move on from there. We'll talk more about consumption. A lot could be said here. I'll read the second part. Leadership and collaboration are essential to effect the kind of changes that will be required in international supply chains. City mayors can set a vision and convene actors. Here's more of that globalese language to bring about the changes we describe. Leadership will also be needed from national governments, they're mentioned sort of secondary, businesses, and from individual people, really. Well, we'll see. The work reported here forces a focus on what a sustainable urban future might look like and helps us consider what policies, regulations, incentives, and behavioral changes will be necessary to transition to a zero carbon world. And we'll go from there. This is a little bit about Arup. They're a little bit more ambiguous. This is from their website, Leading Sustainable Development. Arup is a global collective of designers, engineering, and sustainability consultants, advisors, and experts dedicated to sustainable development and to using imagination, technology, and rigor to shape a better world. And they have their fingers in a lot of pies, engineering projects all around the world, including the Tube in London. Some updates on that. Now, the C40, we'll describe C40 a little more. It's a global network of mayors of the world's leading cities, and the head of it right now is the London Mayor Sadiq Khan, of course. And they're united in their action to confront this ongoing so-called climate crisis. And we'll keep moving from there. This is just from the introduction to the C40 report. They're looking at broadening cities' climate action. That's broadening that action by considering consumption-based emissions. That's really important. We'll get more to that in a moment. What can cities and mayors do to support action on consumption as part of their drive to limit global warming and continuing the collective journey to leverage cities' role in global mitigation efforts? And we'll get a little more into the nitty-gritty as we move along. Human consumption, not just production, is now being eyed much more for reducing climate change. This is what's significant here. New ways of measuring the climate footprint of C40 cities show that urban consumption is a key driver of these global emissions. And while C40 cities have strong action plans in place to significantly cut emissions produced directly within their geographic boundaries, emissions measured by what is consumed within C40 cities are rising, and if left unchecked, will nearly double, they claim, by 2050, plus 87% allegedly. And to avoid climate breakdown, not just a climate crisis, but climate breakdown, emissions from global urban consumption, get this, must have or be cut in half by 2030. That's only a few years away. For this to be achieved, emissions from consumption in high income cities must decrease by 2/3 within the next decade. At the same time, rapidly developing economies need to adopt sustainable consumption patterns when growing. So these are some major goals they're laying out here. And we'll kind of begin to summarize. Urban action on consumption can significantly reduce emissions from key consumption categories such as buildings and infrastructure, 26% by 2030, 44% by 2050. Food consumption reduced 36% by 2030, 60% by 2050. Private transport, 28% by 2030, 39% by 2050. Clothing and textiles reduced 39% by 2030, 66% by 2050. That's less clothing being produced and consumed, less commerce, evidently. Electronics and household appliances reduce 18% by 2030, 33% by 2050, as well as aviation with some similar percentages there. And cutting consumption-based emissions will deliver wider benefits, they claim, for a city and its residents. Individuals, businesses, and city governments all stand to gain if these things are delivered in the right way. They're saying that health is improved and mortality rates are lowered when it's safer to walk and cycle rather than drive, where there's more public space, where the air is cleaner. We've been talking a little bit about that, where water and land are used effectively. Well, who defines effectively on using water and land, where housing is more affordable? And they talk about people eating less meat, having fewer heart conditions and things like that. Well, an element of that could be true, of course. And a little bit more where the science says we are. And this really outlines where they see cities as really being powerhouses in this world. Cities are leading on tackling climate change, climate breakdown, that is, by setting ambitious targets. Cities are at the center of the world economy, and decisions made in those cities have a significant impact on emissions, et cetera, within and beyond their boundaries. C40 cities have already peaked. Get this, C40 cities have already peaked in terms of production-based emissions. So now the ongoing long-term plan that's been simmering on the stove here, the globalist kitchen, you might say, is that now we got to look at consumption. Now we got to look at what and how much food people are eating, what and how much clothing they're possessing and buying. And so the whole gamut of human activity, Brian and David, is being much more brought into focus here. And so this is something we need to drag off out of the back files here and get it out in front of us, because some of these things get past us and we got to see the whole plan.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for that report. And of course, clean air is part of these targets, so we can understand what's happening in London. This is not policy coming in through the UK government. This is globalist policy coming in line with UN Sustainable Development Plans. Well,